James Colbert was the kind of neighbor everyone trusted, quiet, polite, and almost invisible until a single missing person case pulled back the curtain on a life of secrets darker than anyone could imagine. James Colbert lived on Willow Street for nearly 7 years, and in all that time he managed to remain almost invisible. His house, a small gray bungalow with neatly trimmed hedges and a spotless driveway, blended perfectly with the quiet neighborhood. Children rode their bikes past his porch without a second glance, and neighbors described him as polite but distant. He nodded when spoken to, offered a faint smile, and went about his business without ever giving anyone a reason to wonder who he really was. There were no loud arguments, no unexpected visitors, no late-night parties. James was the kind of neighbor people claimed they wanted: quiet, clean, and predictable. He worked nights as a security guard at a sprawling warehouse on the edge of town. The job suited his solitary nature. While most people were asleep, James roamed the empty corridors, checking locks and doors, keeping watch over silent stacks of crates and pallets. The odd hours gave him a convenient excuse for avoiding social gatherings. If anyone asked why they rarely saw him during the day, he simply said he needed to rest before work. Most people accepted that answer without question. After all, what could be suspicious about a man who worked hard and minded his own business? Still, there were small details that might have raised concerns if anyone had been paying closer attention. James never invited anyone inside his home, not even to drop off a package or share a cup of coffee. Delivery drivers often found carefully written notes taped to his door with instructions to leave parcels on the porch. His windows were always covered with heavy curtains, drawn tightly even on bright summer mornings. Neighbors sometimes noticed the faint hum of machinery coming from his basement, a low, steady sound that carried through the ground when the neighborhood was especially quiet. When asked about it, James shrugged and said it was just an old heater or a dehumidifier. His explanation sounded ordinary enough, and people quickly forgot about it. During warm evenings, when families opened their windows to let in the breeze, an unusual odor occasionally drifted from James's backyard. It wasn't strong or overwhelming, just a faint chemical smell that seemed to come and go with the wind. Some thought it might be paint or cleaning solution. Others joked that he was experimenting with strange fertilizers for his small vegetable garden. Because the smell never lasted long, no one felt the need to report it. Life on Willow Street moved on, and James remained an unremarkable figure in the background. What stood out most about James was his careful routine. Every day followed the same pattern: a brief walk to the corner store in the afternoon, a solitary dinner at precisely 6 o'clock, and a quiet departure for work at 10. There were no surprises, no sudden changes, nothing to hint at the darkness that hid behind his steady, measured existence. To the outside world, James Colbert was simply a quiet man living a quiet life. No one suspected that beneath his calm exterior, a far more unsettling reality was waiting to be uncovered. The calm of Willow Street began to crack when a young college student named Emily Waters vanished without a trace. Emily was 21, a bright and athletic woman who jogged every evening along a familiar route near the local park. One night, she left her apartment shortly after sunset and never came home. Her friends grew concerned when she didn't respond to their messages, and by morning her car still sat untouched in the parking lot. Police found her phone on a park bench near the jogging path, its screen cracked and battery nearly dead. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, and no witnesses who remembered anything unusual. The park's security cameras captured nothing more than a blur of movement and distant shadows. It was as if Emily had simply disappeared into thin air. The town reeled from the news. Flyers with Emily's picture appeared on every telephone pole, and search parties scoured the surrounding woods. Volunteers trudged through muddy trails, calling her name until their voices were hoarse. Days stretched into weeks, but every promising lead ended in disappointment. Rumors spread quickly, each one more troubling than the last. Some believed Emily had run away, while others whispered about a stalker hiding in plain sight. Despite the effort, no one could explain how a young woman could vanish from a well-lit park in the middle of a populated neighborhood. Before the shock of Emily's disappearance could fade, another case emerged that deepened the mystery. 2 weeks later, a 30-year-old office worker named Claire Monroe went missing during her morning commute. Claire's car was discovered abandoned in a grocery store parking lot only a few miles from where Emily had last been seen. Her purse remained inside the vehicle, but her keys and wallet were gone. Investigators examined the surveillance cameras surrounding the store, hoping to find a clue. Footage showed Claire parking her car, stepping out, and walking toward the street. After that, she was never seen again. The similarities between the two cases were impossible to ignore. Both women were alone, both vanished in public spaces, and both left behind personal belongings that offered no clear explanation. Detectives began to wonder if the disappearances were connected. They analyzed hours of video from traffic cameras and nearby businesses, searching for anything that linked the two women. Eventually, a patrol officer reviewing a long stretch of footage noticed a dark blue van parked near both scenes. The license plates were obscured by a thick layer of mud, and the driver never appeared clearly on camera. The van seemed to linger in each location before quietly pulling away. It was the first solid lead investigators had, and it immediately drew their attention. After tracing the vehicle's movements through scattered bits of footage, police finally located a partial plate number. A slow and careful search led them to a single registered owner, James Colbert of Willow Street. The discovery sent a quiet ripple through the investigation team. Neighbors had always described James as harmless and polite, but the pattern surrounding the van was too precise to ignore. Without alerting him, detectives began discreetly watching his every move, hoping he might lead them to answers that had eluded them for weeks. Surveillance on James Colbert began quietly, with unmarked cars parked at discreet angles along Willow Street and plainclothes officers rotating shifts to track his movements. Detectives expected long stretches of uneventful observation, but James's habits immediately drew attention. He followed a rigid nightly schedule, leaving his house precisely at 10 o'clock with the same dark blue van that appeared in the disappearance footage. He never took the same route twice. Instead, he wandered aimlessly through back roads, industrial alleys, and empty parking lots before returning home just before sunrise. His driving pattern was deliberate but unpredictable, a maze of detours and sudden turns that made tailing him a challenge. Investigators soon realized he was either testing for surveillance or following a routine he carefully kept hidden from the world. One evening, officers trailed him as he drifted toward an abandoned industrial district on the outskirts of town. The area was littered with rusting warehouses and half-collapsed storage units, a forgotten corner that rarely saw visitors after dark. James parked near a row of weathered buildings and disappeared inside a rusted metal unit, carrying a small duffel bag. He remained inside for nearly 30 minutes before returning to the van and driving away without a word or glance behind him. The stop became a focus of the investigation. Detectives suspected the storage unit might hold evidence of the missing women, but without a warrant they could only observe and wait. Meanwhile, a deeper look into James's life uncovered more troubling signs. Financial records showed no clear reason for his late-night excursions. His bank account reflected a modest salary and few purchases, yet he regularly bought cleaning supplies and industrial-grade chemicals from hardware stores across different towns to avoid a pattern. He owned no cell phone under his name, preferring prepaid devices that were nearly impossible to trace. Even his co-workers described him as a mystery, a man who kept to himself during breaks and never shared details about his personal life. To detectives, it became clear that James was meticulous in covering his tracks, but his perfection only fueled their determination. After weeks of observation and mounting evidence, investigators finally secured a warrant to search both the storage unit and his home. The storage unit revealed only a scattering of tools, tarps, and heavy-duty cleaning equipment, disturbing, but not enough to link him directly to the missing women. The true shock came when they entered his house. At first glance, the interior looked as controlled and sterile as the man himself. Every surface was spotless, every item carefully arranged. But in the basement, behind a tall set of metal shelves, an officer noticed a faint seam running along the wall. What appeared to be solid concrete was actually a false panel cleverly disguised with paint and plaster. Behind it stood a heavy steel door secured with 3 separate locks. The room beyond was silent and cold, the air thick with the scent of earth and something metallic. Inside, shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Neatly arranged jars filled every shelf, each labeled with a date and sealed tightly. Within the jars were small, chilling contents, clumps of soil, strands of hair, broken jewelry, and fragments of clothing that appeared to belong to different people. Each jar represented a carefully preserved piece of someone's life, stored like a private collection of memories only James understood. Forensic teams moved quickly once the basement was secured, photographing every inch of the hidden room before touching a single object. The jars, more than 50 in total, were arranged in perfect rows as if part of a carefully curated exhibit. Each lid bore a date written in precise block letters, some stretching back nearly a decade. At first, investigators believed the contents might be harmless keepsakes or items taken from abandoned homes, but the truth emerged as soon as the first samples were tested. Inside the sealed glass were traces of human DNA, hair follicles, flakes of skin, even small fragments of bone, each matching a different missing person reported in the surrounding counties over the last 10 years. Cases once thought unrelated were now tied together by the chilling order of James Colbert as private archive. The personal belongings inside the jars deepened the unease. Tiny bracelets that might have once belonged to children rested beside single earrings, frayed shoelaces, and worn watches stopped at random times. Some jars contained soil from specific locations, parks, hiking trails, and riverbanks that investigators later learned were the last known places where victims had been seen. It became clear that James was not merely collecting random objects. He was preserving moments, memorializing the final places and possessions of his victims with obsessive care. Every jar was a silent record of someone's life abruptly interrupted. Among the shelves, one jar stood out. Unlike the others, it contained nothing but a small piece of folded paper and a thin layer of dirt. When opened, the paper revealed only a future date written in the same meticulous handwriting as the others. The date was just days away. There was no name attached, no clue to identify the intended victim, only the chilling implication that James had already chosen someone. Detectives understood they had interrupted a plan that was still in motion. The empty jar suggested that his pattern was far from over and that another person might have disappeared if their search had been delayed even a single week. Investigators dug deeper into James's past, hoping to understand the meaning behind the jars and the ritualistic precision of his collection. Old employment records revealed a pattern of frequent job changes, each coinciding with unsolved disappearances in nearby towns. He had moved from city to city, leaving behind a trail of missing persons that stretched farther than anyone initially realized. Yet there were no confessions, no handwritten explanations, nothing to reveal what drove him to collect these grim trophies. The evidence spoke for itself, but the man behind it remained silent. As experts analyzed the items, psychologists speculated that the jars served as a way for James to relive his crimes, freezing time and preserving control long after the actual events were over. Each piece of hair, each speck of dirt was a reminder of power, a private narrative only he could fully understand. Detectives worked to match every item to a name, contacting families who had waited years for answers. For some, the discovery brought long-awaited closure. For others, it opened new wounds, forcing them to confront the haunting reality that their loved ones had been part of a carefully maintained collection hidden in plain sight. James Colbert was taken into custody in the early hours of a quiet Monday morning. Officers surrounded his house before dawn, moving with silent precision to ensure he had no chance to escape or destroy evidence. When they knocked, he opened the door without resistance, his expression blank and unreadable. He offered no protest as handcuffs closed around his wrists, no sign of surprise as detectives read him his rights. Neighbors awoke to flashing lights and the low hum of police radios, staring in disbelief as the man they had once described as polite and dependable was led away. To them, James was the quiet figure who trimmed his hedges and waved politely on garbage day. Watching him disappear into the back of a patrol car felt like seeing a mask fall away, revealing a stranger who had been hiding in plain sight all along. Inside the interrogation room, James maintained a chilling silence. Hours of questioning produced nothing more than a calm, steady gaze. He neither denied the evidence nor offered a confession, leaving investigators to piece together his motives through the grim artifacts of his secret life. Forensic teams continued their work in the basement, cataloging each jar and cross-referencing DNA with decades of missing person reports. The list of potential victims grew by the day, stretching beyond county lines and into neighboring states. Every new match forced detectives to notify families who had spent years searching for answers, each call reopening old wounds that had never truly healed. The discovery of the empty jar marked with a future date weighed heavily on everyone involved. Investigators believed it represented a victim who had not yet been chosen, proof that James was planning to strike again. While he remained silent, the evidence suggested a methodical pattern that could have continued indefinitely if not for the unexpected break in the case. Detectives examined his storage habits, his late-night drives, and the faint chemical smells neighbors had long dismissed. Piece by piece, a disturbing picture emerged of a man who planned his crimes with military precision, leaving almost nothing to chance. During the trial, the courtroom was packed with reporters, victims' families, and curious onlookers drawn to the chilling details of the case. Prosecutors presented their evidence in painstaking detail, displaying photographs of the hidden room, the jars, and the personal belongings inside. The defense offered little more than a plea for psychological evaluation, but the overwhelming weight of the evidence left little doubt. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before finding James guilty on multiple counts of kidnapping, murder, and unlawful confinement. He was sentenced to life without parole, a judgment that brought relief to some but no real comfort to those who had lost loved ones. Yet the case refused to rest even after the conviction. While cataloging the last of the evidence, technicians discovered a small brass key hidden inside one of the jars. It belonged to a storage locker miles away, a location James had never mentioned. Inside the locker, investigators uncovered another set of shelves, more jars, and a single weathered notebook filled with handwritten dates stretching years into the future. Some of those dates had already passed, others were yet to come. Each entry hinted at plans that had never been carried out, names that remained unknown, and locations that could not be traced. Even with James locked away, the full scope of his crimes remained uncertain. The discovery left detectives with a haunting realization: the true extent of what James Colbert had done might never be fully uncovered, and the shadows of his hidden world could linger long after his arrest.